Hello and welcome. My name is Magor Dukas and I'll be your guide during this video tutorial about our software called MMAP Editor. In this first chapter I'll be talking about what you can use this software for, but before we take the jump, I'd like to introduce the team to you.
Hello, I am László Letenyei and I were the designer of the MMAP Editor in 2006.
And Borbély Botond was our chief programmer.
Let me introduce you to a very important figure. He's Kevin Lynch. He didn't work with us directly, but we consider ourselves his disciples. In a way, we respect him and his work a great deal. It is he who has created the framework upon which we have conceived this software. Mental mapping. What is it more precisely? There's a scientific definition for this. If you are curious about it, then read upon it. I'd explain it with my own words instead. Mental mapping is the research of how we see and perceive a space in our mind. I, for example, live in Timișoara. I have a map in my head of the city, and in some regards this might be similar to how other residents of the city perceive it. But in other regards it might be completely different. People whose main transportation is cars will have a very different map of the city than people who travel by foot or public transportation. People's view of the city is also determined by their age category, their interests, occupation, and many other things. Cities and home cities are not the only places of which one might have a mental map of. You also have a map about your country, your continent. I, for example, have a map about Romania, I have a map about Hungary, and I also have a map about Europe. I even have a map about places that I have never been to in my life. The interesting thing is that these perceptions we have about the world will eventually get to shape the world around us. Because if something is not present on your mental maps, then chances are that is of no interest to you, thus you won't travel there. If some place is missing from most people's mental spaces, chances are that that place will rarely see development. If, however, something is on your mental map, then you will care about it and pay attention to it. So what can mental mapping be used for more concretely? We could use it for urban development, for example. Using his work, László often gives advice to city leaders about where development is most crucial. We could use mental mapping to probe how different categories of people orient themselves in the city and which routes they use. We could, for example, use this to plan the city in such a manner as to make sure that young students can find their way to school without getting lost. Even within buildings, this technique can be very useful. Where should we place orientative signs in order for people to most effectively navigate the building? How do we gather data about mental maps? What are the techniques? The classical method has been developed by Stanley Milgram, who in the 1970s did research using the technique he dubbed free recall. We consider this the most popular method of mental mapping to date. With the free recall technique, you are given a blank page and are asked to draw your city or settlement without any restraints, and this contains a lot of data about how you perceive your city or your settlement. This is a drawing made within an interview with Stanley Milgram. It was drawn by a Parisian butcher. If we take a closer look, it's very strange because many places that are often associated with Paris are completely missing from this map. But we can also observe that instead, there are places present on this map on the southern parts of Paris which we as tourists have no knowledge about, but the butcher lives his life here. He has named these streets that he must frequent due to his work. Although slightly awkward looking, these maps in fact give very precise information about how the respondents think. These maps give a clear indication of how, for example, Paris is used by Parisians, or how Budapest is used by people living there. The free recalling method is not without its faults, though. On the upside to free recalling is that it produces very valid results. The problem is reliability. The main cause of this lack of reliability is due to the fact that results from many different people about the same spaces are hard to compare to each other, and thus data is hard to extract. It has happened many times to László that he had made an urban development study using mental mapping and then presented his conclusions to the mayor with suggestions of where development was needed. To which the mayor often replied that yes, this is all good and well, but before such decisions he has to convince the council, so Laszlo should produce conclusive proof for this task, and doing this based on awkward drawings is hardly possible. Furthermore, if you have drawings from a sample size of, say, 500 or 1,000 people, each very unique and valid, it is very hard to extract data and interpret it. Our software, the Mental Map Editor, is our answer to these problems. It is more than capable of handling a sample size of 500 or 1,000 or even more, and it is capable of effectively collecting and then interpreting data on such a scale. The very basis of the software is Kevin Lynch's work, The Image of the City, from 1960. Kevin Lynch said, if we'd like to know how people think about their city, then we have to ask them about mainly 5 elements. One of these elements are mental spaces. We have to ask them to name city districts. If they don't have a name, then it's not really a district. Once districts are named, the next thing we should ask about are the boundaries or edges of these districts. Then we should ask about paths, nodes like Astoria in Budapest, and then finally landmarks. Our mental map editor is based on these 5 elements, which were highlighted by Kevin Lynch. We have question blocks dealing with mental spaces, axes, paths and nodes, landmarks and boundaries. Aside from these question blocks, you, as editor of the survey, can add your own questions as well as you please, like you would in any generic surveying program. When should you use this program? If you're curious to know how other people perceive a settlement, this is very important if you work in a field regarding city planning or tourism. If you're a student and want to learn about an interesting growing field or simply want to experiment with research like the one Kevin Lynch did, then this software is for you. If you're interested in mental mapping, then allow us to invite you to use this software which we have developed. Mental Map Editor also analyzes the gathered data. I don't know about you, but personally I always wanted to use a software which not only gathered data, but at the press of a button also created an analysis, ready for printing. In Mental Map Editor, this is exactly possible, and it is very effective. It's important to once more emphasize that with Mental Map Editor, you can ask your own questions from respondents. If you're curious about, say, their age, occupation, income, they think about their community leaders, or whether they like Lady Gaga or not. If you're interested in creating a questionnaire, with the help of which you can gather data about mental mapping, but you also want to ask classical type questions, then Mental Map Editor is a good choice. There's no need for creating 2 surveys, one about mental maps and a separate one containing the classic type questions. It would take you double the time and double the resources. But here's an important note. This questionnaire cannot and should not be used like a simple standard questionnaire editor. This software asks first and foremost about concepts regarding mental mapping, meaning it's not possible to skip questions belonging to the question blocks about mental maps. In fact, these are the first questions asked in all cases. Each of the 5 such question blocks must contain at least 1 question. If we have managed to pique your interest, then please continue with this e-learning course, watch the remaining videos, and learn how to use the software fully. Many users get confused when they realize that this software has to be downloaded and installed because most of the 3 computing solutions today run within your internet browser, and no such tasks are required to take full advantage of them. People thus only have to enter an internet address of the solution they're looking for, and they're already ready to go. In the case of Mental Map Editor, the situation is a bit different. You have to download and install like you would with a classic software. This is a multi-step process since you have to install a database operating software as well as the Mental Map Editor. The e-learning course covers the process of downloading and installing the software, but if you happen to have any questions about any segment of the software, please feel free to contact us. We will gladly provide additional information. Thank you for your attention and have a good time learning about our software.